Let's start this one off with a game. Can you spot the assassin? It's fairly telling that May's assassin's garb seems specifically chosen to make her stand out as much as possible, rather than blending in with her surroundings. Forget Agent 47's many disguises, or Altair's blending in with a roaming pack of priests. It's far more important to get that cool assassin's look down. Star Wars The Acolyte's very first episode, Lost and Found, immediately feels like something ripped off from fanfiction.net. Not surprising, since it's a series placed in the High Republic, which is an era Disney popped into existence specifically so they could make big-budget fanfiction close enough in timeline to still ruin the main series, but far enough away that fans can't really argue. But not only does The Acolyte play out like baby's first fanfiction, it's definitely the type to have the words "don't like, don't read" branded in bold right at the start. The whole thing flows as if written by someone going through the motions of being a writer, but with zero understanding. That is to say, there is no flow. The Acolyte is full of modern writing tropes made for a modern audience, and every one of them drags this horror show down even further. Set 100 years before the rise of the Empire, the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic have prospered for centuries without war. Note, this era of peace is why it's called the High Republic, and therefore not a comment on the writer's sobriety, although you could have fooled me. But in the dark corners of the galaxy, a powerful few learn to use the Force in secret. And here's why that's a good thing. One of them is my super cool edgy lone assassin OC, who's totally an original character, so do not steal, risks discovery to seek revenge. Or so the premise says. But this opening leads us to one obvious question, which becomes a larger and larger narrative problem as the episode goes on. In fact, by the end of the first scene, the show has already given several glaring issues, but we'll get to those in a moment. The episode begins with a mysterious knife-throwing assassin named May. No, the other May. She walks into a bar and approaches a Jedi Master named Indara, who's surrounded by a group of friends. May then demands Indara attack her, a battle ensues, and May defeats the Jedi Master with a tiny knife to the chest. I guess ever since Disney Star Wars made women immune to lightsabers, a tiny knife is a death sentence. Then it's off to a whole new character named Osha, who we'll find out is May's twin, who has chosen the noble profession of mechanic over assassin, so we can't complain about her fixing ships like we did with Rey. I'll take that as a victory. Looks like we embarrassed them into using at least a little proper writing structure. Well done, fellow Star Wars critics. After some cringy modern dialogue that sounds like a quirky conversation in a Californian cafe rather than a Star Wars show, we see Osha and her co-worker making ship repairs. I mean, seriously, trade feds? Mech necks? Get your brain-rotted Twitter dialogue out of my Star Wars. Just because the writers spend every waking moment shortening words to sound cool and typing out tirades on social media doesn't mean the Star Wars characters have. Twitter really has rotted away any hope of good dialogue, hasn't it? In fact, if there isn't a Jedi or a recognizable Star Wars alien on screen, the dialogue and quirky acting will quickly have you forgetting this is a Star Wars show and leave you wondering when the Avengers are showing up. This is the scene where we have the infamous burning fire in space, which is kind of like if Osha just took off her helmet to get a breath of fresh air. But there are far more hideous storytelling flaws to tackle first. The Jedi pop by to take an Osha under suspicion of murder. They believe Osha was the one who killed Jedi Master Indara from the beginning. This is where we meet Jedi Knight Yord Fanboy, whose only real purpose is to be humiliated by women. Typical modern Disney. So they put her aboard a small prison ship where the prisoners ask Osha aloud if she wants to join in on their super cool prison escape plan, like they're inviting her out for drinks. The prisoners break out and the ship crashes on a nearby planet, where Osha starts getting visions from the plot fairy that her twin sister is still alive. You know, because being accused of a murder she didn't commit, with an eyewitness saying it was definitely her, apparently failed to spark anything in Osha's mind that her twin might still be alive. Instead, the dungeon master just had to tell her with ghost powers. Meanwhile, we switch to yet another character named Jedi Master Soul, who is Osha's former teacher. He requests to go look for Osha, finds her, and brings her back to his ship without much incident. Osha crashing and being left stranded on an alien planet was only a minor problem, was resolved in a few minutes, and was just there so Osha could get visions of plot points she should have been able to figure out on her own. And lastly, we see May meeting with her edgy master, and in Disney Star Wars tradition, just tells us everything we need to know. The Jedi live in a dream they believe everyone shares. If you attack a Jedi with a weapon, you will fail. Steel or laser are no threat to them, but an acolyte kills without a weapon. An acolyte kills the dream. I know he's supposed to be intimidating, but the dialogue feels closer to a Star Wars version of a fedora atheist than a serious villain. And the bluntness of the dialogue reminded me of Netflix live-action Avatar when Katara's grandmother just points at Aang and literally says, he is the last airbender. She is the Acolyte. The Acolyte, as a series, seems to follow the modern trend of tearing down our heroes. Oh, I mean, deconstructing the Jedi. And it's done by people who have no idea how to construct a hero in the first place. And this is why you should check out my Dr. Alpha series, which is currently open for a second chance campaign on Indiegogo. My first book, Dr. Alpha Miracle Child, follows the story of infamous supervillain Dr. Alpha as he's rescued by Glorious, his heroic nemesis and secret son, to join the valiant Crusaders in their battle against Mulvion, the malicious Martian mastermind, as he invades Earth with a giant mechanized armada. And Dr. Alpha Dead Man's Lullaby, the first volume of a proposed trilogy, is also available. Taking place 20 years before the events of Miracle Child, Alpha finds himself betrayed by an old colleague, Dr. Cloner, who has injected Alpha with an experimental virus, giving him about an hour left to live, forcing Alpha to literally fight for every extra minute of life. Think Crank, but with supervillains. If Miracle Child introduced the character of Dr. Alpha, Dead Man's Lullaby will introduce the world of Dr. Alpha, and more importantly, his past. While Watchmen, The Boys, and Invincible are all interesting in their own way as they deconstruct superheroes and explore how their polished personas are really carefully polished facades, Dr. Alpha deconstructs the villain. What makes an ordinary man turn evil? Just like modern media enjoys showing you white knights fall to their flaws, this series shows a rebellious villain lifted by his long-forgotten virtues as he goes on to face the challenges of raising his only grandson. Currently, both books are complete, and most of the money will just go to printing. The rest will go to fulfillment, adding a few proposed new pages, and finishing the Dead Man's Lullaby trilogy. So if you want a violent, brutal, and a bit goofy story that has fun with the superhero genre from someone who doesn't hate superheroes, give Dr. Alpha a try. Physical copies are only available through campaigns at the time being, so get them while you can. Anyway, but this leads us to the real main issues the episode lays out, which I've boiled down to 3 main things, 2/3 of which are a result of what I call the dreaded Game of Thrones syndrome. First, way too many main characters introduced way too early. Game of Thrones was a unique project, painstakingly put together by George R. R. Martin, who's an actual writer with the skills and discipline to properly structure a complex story starring several main characters. And even he leaned heavily on history for guidance. It's not something just anyone can do, and it's definitely not something a writer can just do simply because they want it to be like Game of Thrones. Juggling so many characters without dragging the story down is like the writing equivalent of a Las Vegas floor show. In the hands of an experienced craftsman like Martin, bouncing from character to character can enhance the overall narrative, but in the hands of the obviously amateur Disney writers, it not only hurts the story, it downright guts the story. In episode 1, we're introduced to May, Master Indara, Osha, her friend, the crew of Nemorians who travels with, Yord, Jeki Lon, Jedi Master Vernestra, and Jedi Master Soul, all in the first episode. If you recall from the summary, we're constantly switching around between these characters. We begin with May and Indara, then to Osha and the ship's crew, then to Soul and Master Vernestra, and then finally the mysterious evil master at the end. You'd think a lot of story could be covered in nearly 40 minutes, but the show tries so hard to be Game of Thrones, it gets bogged down in a deluge of characters and information that very little actually happens. Master Indara gets killed by May, Osha is taken in by Yord on suspicion of murder, and May meets with her master. Some of you might say, wait, what about the crash? Well, this leads us to the next major issue, too much dead weight. The writer's desperate attempt to capture the epic Game of Thrones vibe pushes them to shovel 10 pounds of story into a 5-pound bag. And nowhere is this more blatant than with the scene where Osha was dumped into a small prison ship, the prison break happens, and Osha's ship crash lands on a generic ice planet. This whole scene is just set up so Osha can save a guy and learn that her sister is still alive and killing Jedi. The plot literally has to give her the answers, which is odd since it seems they wanted Osha to be a clever character. The following events have Soul, Yord, and Jeki Lon go to the planet to retrieve her, which they do nearly without incident. It would be one thing if this scene pushed the plot in other ways, like having Osha captured by space pirates, or introducing new enemies or new challenges. Maybe Jeki Lon or Yord could die to establish a sense of danger. I would prefer both personally. In the end, the Soul Brothers just go down to the planet and retrieve Osha. Nothing is gained and nothing is lost. She might as well have just not crashed at all. The only thing we gain is Osha's discovery that her sister is still alive. And the plot told her that. It wasn't planet specific. Even if we got something as simple as finding solid proof that Osha didn't commit the murder on this planet, we might have something as long as the evidence makes sense. But we get nothing. By the way, this is why adding a conflict with some pirates or something could be useful. Maybe Osha gets kidnapped. Maybe the Jedi save her and their base contains clues that could help prove Osha's innocence, or the discovery that May is still alive. Overall, the story would have flowed better and made much more sense if 1. Yord just took Osha on his ship. Yord knows Osha from her Jedi days, so they aren't strangers and she seems to be cooperating. So just take her on the main ship where you can keep an eye on her, instead of leaving her in the custody of some flimsy droids. 2. She gets to meet with Master Soul on Coruscant, and they could even have the same conversation, where Soul believes her innocence without any proof whatsoever. But then how could she find out about May? Simple. 3. Let Osha be clever. Maybe it's here we can organically dive into Osha's past as a former Padawan, before she was tossed out for being sad. Maybe Osha notes how good it feels to be back in the old temple, and maybe being back in such a place of study and contemplation, Osha is starting to put the pieces together. Now I should note that the Jedi are trying to keep this matter hidden. To quote, "If it were to become public that a former Jedi killed one of our own," to which Soul responds, "our political enemies could use it against us." And then Venestra says, "Discretion is important, our justice swift, an example made." So then, it's likely they might keep Osha under their constant supervision while they investigate. And I should also note that Venestra is being set up as an antagonist here, something that'll come into play for episode 2. So keep that in mind for next time. Sure, Osha believes May to be dead, but maybe she gives some thought to the events that led her here. Who would want to kill Master Indara? Why would Osha be blamed for it, and why would the one witness point to her as the culprit with such confidence? Perhaps she could conclude, against all odds, that her sister might be alive. Not only would this cut the fat from this unsightly, bloated script, but it would organically lead us to Osha's past as a Padawan, and maybe even explore what drove her to become a student. But most importantly, Osha is the one actively forming the conclusion instead of just being handed the answer by ghost magic. In short, we get a moment for Osha to be clever and to display her cleverness. And this would drive her to convince Soul to pursue that possibility. Maybe Jedi Master Venestra could reject the idea, since she's not about to let a murder suspect leave the temple without solid evidence. And this is when Soul can defy Venestra to add a little tension, and to give Soul a meaningful character moment, that he's willing to risk his career and his freedom on Osha's conclusion. A former master having so much faith in his former student that he's willing to put everything on the line to clear her name. And look at that. We have stakes and we have tension. Things we have very little of in the actual show. Yord and Soul's current student, Jeki Lon, insist on coming along. Maybe Yord and Jeki Lon could choose to join out of sheer loyalty. So whatever you might have thought of these characters beforehand, we see their nobility shine through. And most importantly, these changes would switch the characters from passive to active. Other than May, arguably Soul is the most proactive, since he specifically requests to go fetch Osha from the ice planet. But Yord, Jeki Lon, and even Osha are just being strung along by the plot, going from place to place simply because they've been ordered to. They're not really making major decisions on their own. In summary, episode 1 of The Acolyte tries to give us so much story, it ends up giving us very little plot. Every new character, and there are a lot, stops the story for proper introductions. In fact, nearly every introduction could have been its own episode. Imagine if we just followed May or Osha, and we keep the story moving, introducing new people as they become relevant rather than constantly jumping around from one perspective to another. Again, in the hands of an experienced writer like Martin, this can weave a tantalizing tale, but in the hands of these novice Disney writers, it's just poor story structure, which leads us to the third and final problem: the mystery box. Or in this case, mystery boxes. Episode 1 is all set up, a long roster of hints of later mysteries with no actual payoffs. Mystery can be fun and intriguing, especially because readers are hardwired to seek answers to questions. And to be fair, unlike J.J. Abrams' boxes, this one does have an answer. But in this case, it's an answer that shouldn't have been hidden away. Why? Well, if you remember, the opening of episode 1 has May confronting Jedi Master Indara. The writing makes it clear that we're meant to side and sympathize with May the assassin. First of all, she's the character we're following, and the one introduced in the opening text. But more than that, we get hints that the Jedi did something horrific in the past to to justify May's rage, and that Master Indara is a lot less noble than she seems. For example, Indara responds to May's challenge by saying, "Jedi do not attack the unarmed," trying to play the perception of a noble Jedi. However, May responds with, "Yes, you do," not only hinting that Master Indara might have somehow been morally corrupt, but also that May has witnessed that moral corruption. So this sets up the classic vengeance formula. It's not typically the storyline of a hero, but the audience will still side with a character wielding righteous anger against a dastardly villain who wronged them. And this setup is bolstered when Indara removes May's mask and says, "You? What are you doing here?" To which May simply responds, "I'm here to kill you." Shakespeare this obviously is not, but the exchange does confirm a past confrontation between the two. So again, the writing strongly hints that Indara is guilty of some terrible evil, and that May is a victim trying to get revenge in a world that refuses her justice. In short, May is the good guy and Indara is the bad guy, especially since you haven't seen Indara deny her supposed crime. So the story clearly wants our sympathies to be with May, and this is exactly where the script falls apart. In writing, there are two major terms writers use to help identify heroes and villains. The first is save the cat, which is when a hero does something noble so we know he's the good guy. On the other end is kick the dog, which is when a character does something evil so the audience knows he's the bad guy. And going by this, the first scene is a complete mess. And because of their beloved mystery box method, the entire episode doesn't even try to clean up the mess. It's just left festering and rotted beneath a desert sun. We're supposed to sympathize with May, yet she's the aggressor in this situation. She uses dirty tricks to win the battle and is about to kill the innocent bartender until she sees the man has a daughter and May walks away. Which, by the way, is another major attempt to show us that no, really, she's a good person deep down, bigot. Meanwhile, Indara is just minding her own business, hanging out with some friends at a local bar. And as the battle rages, she strives to protect innocent life. In fact, Indara is so focused on saving the bartender from May's ruthlessness, she takes a dagger to the heart. And May's face of barely contained rage is meant to justify the murder. As in, see, she isn't taking pleasure from this, she's filled with righteous anger. Then, of course, we cap it all off with May sparing the bartender for the sake of his daughter. What a saint. Some have defended this opening by equating it to Kill Bill's opening, where the bride delivers a surprise fight to Vanita Green, who's also just minding her own business, living as a housewife in the suburbs. However, Kill Bill handles their cold fight scene quite differently. Sure, we see the bride attack this innocent housewife, but then we see the innocent housewife start fighting back like a professional killer. In fact, the two are evenly matched. A suburban housewife having expert knife skills is rather unusual, and this abnormality helps build the mystery. Not only are they even in fighting ability, neither is particularly good or evil. We don't know anything about either combatant, but Vanita Green changing from normal housewife to trained killer makes her less of an innocent victim and more of a suspect. Now here's the real major difference. Yes, May and the bride both initiated their fight, and both are filled with righteous anger. However, Vanita Green wasn't trying to save people during a fight, and she definitely wasn't lowering her weapon to make the fight more even or honorable like Indara was. The bride and Vanita Green were fighting a battle to the death by any means. In short, neither combatant gave us a save the cat moment for a definitive answer. We really only get significant insight once the two stop fighting and start talking. This is where we get the hint that Vanita had something to do with the death of the bride's family, specifically a daughter. And furthermore, Vanita confesses to it, expressing regret for any wrongdoing. This is Vanita's kick the dog moment. It doesn't make the bride a good person, but it does make Vanita Green more villainous. And then we get the final kick the dog moment for Vanita when she tries to kill the bride with a sneak attack after agreeing to a temporary peace. The bride didn't break the peace, Vanita did. And after she confessed to helping kill the bride's family. Meanwhile, May is taking hostages, threatening innocent people, and beating up the Jedi's friends as Indara actively tries to avoid the conflict, protect people, and show mercy. This is why we need to see what happened the night Indara committed her deadly sins. That is the scene we should have technically started with. Why? Because if we see Indara's truly evil nature on display, maybe then we'd know May's threats to innocent people were only a bluff, for example. Or we'd know that Indara is so evil that May could very well see the sacrifice of an innocent worth Indara's death. Maybe then we'd know Indara's noble gestures are done for less than noble reasons. Maybe it's for show, or to keep up appearances, or even out of pure self-interest. interest. To summarize, Kill Bill worked because 1. The actions we see on screen place our sympathies with the bride, and 2. We actually do get some major insight on why the bride wants revenge on Vernita Green. All of this, and that isn't even to mention the huge issue of May killing a fully fledged Jedi Master in the first few minutes of the show, or the show's endless stream of contradictions. However, these topics are better left for future episodes, and you'll see why. Drink hearty and laugh, Star Wars fans. This circus of insanity has just begun.